We're really lucky to have Kim with us today. Kim's had a incredible career at GiffGaff, where he was Chief Product and Commercial Officer, at Checkatrade, and at Gumtree, where he was Managing Director. Um, and he's had these roles that both cover product, but also more commercial roles. And so what we've asked him to do is share his experience of taking a very commercial look at product management. Um, Kim, over to you.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Great to be here. And I see how many are we today? I can see about 10 of us roughly. So I'm thinking we can make this session quite dynamic, guys. So if you got any questions, as I'm going to be sharing a few slides, but share them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it and make sure that I make it relevant for you all. Let's see. I will start by sharing my screen. Can you all see my screen? Rock and
Yes, we
roll.
can.
Okay, and you can all see me as well. So, yeah, the session is about what happens when product owns the P&L. And I'll start with a provocation that you'll see throughout this document. And it is that I think product already owns the P&L. And I have had to have these conversations regularly with leaders, product leaders in particular, that sometimes shy behind like, well, this is not, I'm not that financial, I'm not that technical. But often what happens when you feel like you're not owning the P&L, someone is doing it for you. So I think an opportunity here, and I'll be sharing a lot of literature, by the way, which is some of the books you'll see behind me as well, uh, is this one from Ermina Ibarra, which did really influence me, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, because a lot of what is required as you step into bigger, broader roles is to act like it. Doesn't mean that you are going to be a financial expert. That's not the intention, and it's expected. But the more you get close to these functions, and product teams can do a great job at connecting functions, then the better you will be as a leader. So you already own the P&L, and that's been what I've seen throughout my entire journey. As Ed was saying, I've led quite a few organizations. Started my career in Barcelona. That's where I'm originally from. I'm aware that doesn't explain my accent. I've lived in many places, including Atlanta and Barcelona, Spain, Madrid. I After finishing my business degree, I moved over to PepsiCo. I started a career in marketing product, and those were the foundational years. But my first proper tech gig was at GiffGaff. So I came to the UK in 2009 to launch GiffGaff with a 6-month contract, a marketing exec contract, actually. So it was a big, bold move at the time. At least it felt that way. And but very early on, I realized that this is what I love doing. Right now, being at GiffGaff, as you will see, I'll dive a little bit into it. Taught me so much. When you have to dive into a very entrepreneurial role, then you definitely get very close to the figures, the numbers, and what drives business outcomes. From GiffGaff, I moved to after 10 years at GiffGaff, I moved to Checkatrade, and I'll talk a little bit about the transformation of Checkatrade. I was there for 4 years as Chief Product and Marketing Officer before moving to Gumtree, where I've been until, well, still am advising to some extent. But my role was Managing Director of Gumtree until December. And now, more recently, which is what we were talking with Ed, I am leading Early Phoenix, which is a business intelligence organization focused very much on the world of AI, so supporting companies to embrace data and AI. Good. So let's start with GiffGaff. So when I joined GiffGaff, there was, I guess, not much going on. We were still in stealth mode. We launched in November 2009, but from those first weeks, first months, it was very clear that we were going to have one golden metric that everyone in the business, every department got behind. You want to have a guess? What was that golden metric at GiffGaff?
It's either subscribers or number of minutes talked.
No. Anyone else from the UK here that knows GiffGaff? Any thoughts? What would drive GiffGaff's growth from early days? uses to help. Yeah, it's not too far removed from that, actually, Ben. Any other guesses? All right, I'll give it to you then. It is Net Promoter Score. So Net Promoter Score was the metric at the time. Actually, it felt innovative in year 2010, 2011. There weren't that many businesses measuring it, and yeah, we felt that that was a good of acid test for when it comes to experience. And the bar wasn't very high, if we're honest, within telecommunications. So there was a lot of room for improvement there. But we obsessed about it. We all got behind that. If we get this metric growing, then the numbers will follow. We'll get more users, the user will stay for longer, and eventually you will see more revenue. And I think that made a huge difference once you've got the whole business behind just this one North Star, this one metric, which could be Net Promoter Score. I'm sure there are many others that you will find useful as well. Now, it's not only about the goal, the metric, it's also about the vision. So we were firm believers that people buy why you do things rather than what you do. So we focus a lot of time thinking about that vision, defining it. And for us, it was that together with our members, anything is possible. So we work very close with users to run a telecommunication organization, which at the time it sounded quite crazy, but we managed to get it to work. So the virtuous circle was something like this. We believe that we deliver that better experience working with members, and we reward members that get involved. From there, we know that our costs will be low. So the more the members get involved in running the business, the more we can pass savings on to members because we don't need to run those operations. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, it meant that most of our sales force was member get member recommendation. The majority of the growth of GiffGaff, and we're talking about an organization now that has 4 million users, over 600 million turnover. The majority of the users joining, I believe still today, come from member get member recommendation programs like this one you see on the screen now. I was far from being the top super recruiter at GiffGaff, but there were quite a few making hundreds of thousands of pounds a year by recommending GiffGaff to their mates. Now, this is also quite challenging at the time and disruptive. We had no call centers. You could not call GiffGaff, a mobile network you cannot call. Imagine that. So the port of call, if you had any question, was mostly through members. So members were helping other members through the community and forums. Of course, if there were cases where related to account where these could not be held in an open forum, then you would be able to contact an agent. But yeah, call centers were not there at all. We implemented an idea from members. So we had this section we called labs, where members would vote for things that we would be implementing. So we would focus on the ones that appeared on the top of those ranks, and we would make sure that they were listened to. So yeah, our members drove most of the roadmap at GiffGaff. I'll give you a good example of what this means. If you take it to an extreme, right? What does it mean to work together with your members? So we were only 6 months into our journey at GiffGaff, and we did not know what was coming with regards to launches, especially with Apple. They're very secretive about what's going to be coming next. And they decided to launch the iPhone 4, which was like, a new model from following the iPhone 3 success. But what we didn't know is that it was going to come with a different SIM size. So this was the micro SIM. I don't know if you remember those, but SIMs used to be like very chunky, and they just reduced in size to what was called a micro SIM. Now, for a business that is a SIM only organization, not having that SIM size was going to become a big challenge. So what we did is we asked our provider, which was Gemalto, if they could give us stock of those SIM cards. Unfortunately, they told us that they weren't available, and because they were also caught off guard, and there was a huge demand. And because we were the smaller ones, if you want, we weren't on top of the list. And as a result, we were going to have to wait something like 6 months to get micro SIM. So for a startup that is, trying to grow out of offering SIM cards to business, not having the most popular SIM card size at the time could become a non-starter at all. So yeah, what do you think we did then? Knowing where we were and knowing that we worked together with members, we didn't have this micro sim. What did we do? Any thoughts? Oh, we've got a few more people joining.
I remember this the Sims used to almost get like cut down somehow.
Very
Is
good.
that part of the solution?
eSIM. I see, Tom. Well, no, back in 2010, there were no eSIMs. Yes, Ed, you are right. Part of the solution was cutting SIMs, but the thing, but I'd start by saying that what we first did is talk to our members, talk to our users, which is not necessarily the reflex that most people would have when you have a problem. Almost the last thing you will do is tell your users that you've got a problem, right? But that was one of the first things that we did. We said, look, I know you want these micro sims. Unfortunately, we are not in a place where we can offer them to you. You're going to have to wait, which was very frustrating. But then a member said, like, well, I've got an iPhone 4 and I've managed to get a SIM card inside it. Like, well, how did you do that? Well, I cut it down with scissors. And that, well, took us a bit by surprise. Didn't know that was an option. But then at the same time, we thought, well, I'm not sure we can recommend users to be cutting down their SIM cards with scissors as a solution. Other members started saying, "Oh, yeah, I did it." Like, I just created this template. One of the members created a GiffGaff template on how to cut down your SIM card, which was, yeah, very surprising, very innovative. But then at the same time, I'm not sure we could send SIM cards with templates and scissors. And then someone else thought, like, don't worry, and that's where the member get member type mentality comes in. I will cut them down for you. Some of them actually bought a SIM cutter from China, and they were cutting them down at scale. Like, we can do that. We can do that at scale. Now, at the time, probably we were a bit relaxed when it comes to processes, but we allowed for that process to occur, to happen. We encourage other members to cut down SIM cards for each other, and that's how I suppose we got through that hurdle. But that created another problem. Actually, we had so many users wanting to cut down SIM cards that there wasn't kind of enough demand for them. So, and another member had a great idea, like, oh, I'll create this website. It's called MicroGaff. And for anyone who wants to become a SIM cutter, they can sign up. And so all the demand will flow into that website. And the demand will be kind of randomly allocated across the base of micro SIM cutters or super user members that were cutting SIM cards. That's how it all got started. And as a result, I think, this really determined the success of GiffGaff from very early days, because we were one of those that could provide those micro sims very quickly after launching. 2 years later, guess what happened? 2 years later, September 2012, iPhone 5 launched with another different size of SIM. It's an even smaller one. It was the Nano SIM. And yeah, we had the same challenge, but at this time we were a bit more prepared. So I was one of the first ones queuing up in the store. Back then we were still a SIM-only provider. And I got the first iPhone 5 on GiffGaff. Now, cutting a micro SIM to a nano SIM was a bit more challenging because you had to cut into the chip. So I thought this could go horribly wrong, but it actually did work. And we provided nano SIM cards within 24 hours of the iPhone 5 launching. So yeah, that's how, I guess, working with users can really get you off the ground, especially when you're in that entrepreneurial and startup mode. And that's a lot of what I learned by starting a business from scratch, is that often it's not resources what you need, it's resourcefulness what you need to focus on. And becoming more resourceful, I think, is going to be a theme throughout everything I touch on today, because product teams have got that superpower. Product leaders are connectors across the organization, and through those connections they get to learn about tech, they get to learn about analytics, they get to learn about finance. And today's topic maybe is a bit more financial, but I think trying to adopt that hat of, like, you are like the mini CPO of your own area, and trying to own all those different disciplines will really make a huge difference on your opportunities to grow and scale. within your organization. Good. Now, as we scaled GiffGaff, I also realized that, well, you needed a little bit of structure, right? It's all well and good to get users, members voting for ideas and implementing those. And we operated pretty much in a Kanban style from day one. But we needed structure as we grew the team and scaled. And the framework that worked best for us was the OKR framework popularized by John Doerr. This was the one that was, I guess, at the time starting to get adopted. We knew it was coming from Google. Google were one of the early adopters of this methodology. And it felt right for us because we wanted to give teams that autonomy, but still we wanted that accountability. We wanted to be more outcome oriented. Now, one of the advices I would give you in terms of how you embrace these types of models, if you haven't done that yet, is to make finance your best friend. This is Sarah Harvey, who was the CFO at GiffGaff while I was there. And that partnership, that relationship was crucial. So I think if you are aiming to think about getting closer to the world of commerce and the world of finance, having an ally as a financial leader is going to be a key unlock for you. But this shouldn't be a surprise, right? Because product has always been in that sweet spot between what are business goals and user needs. We're always trying to think about how we can make a difference there. And when you think about what does finance care about, well, usually is that you want to drive more value to the business than the cost of your team. So when product teams don't know where to start from, well, it's quite easy to find out what's the cost of the team, and tends to be somewhere between $500,000, sometimes, depending on the size of the team, up to £1 million. So you always need to scratch your head to think like, well, can I deliver this value to the organization on an annualized basis? And that is often the start of that partnership, the start of that relationship comes to getting very close to what financial teams value. Another framework that's worked really well for me working with finance teams is Teresa Torres' continuous discovery habit. So when you think about a business outcome for finance, it will often be revenue or be profit. Then you can start cascading down and build your product outcomes, those OKRs that become relevant to product teams. So thinking about revenue, for example, maybe your product outcome that will drive revenue will be increasing the volume of users, the number of members. Maybe it's going to be the average revenue per user. Maybe it's going to be the retention of those users, right? So those are different business outcomes that are very close to ultimately the goal that finance will be caring about. And cascading those business outcomes to the rest of the organization was a big part of what I have been doing throughout my career, be that GiffGaff, Checkatrade, or Gumtree. Talking about Checkatrade, maybe it's a good moment to pivot. So let's talk a little bit about my experience at Checkatrade. Now, when I joined Checkatrade, that's at the start of 2020, just before the pandemic. This was a business that had scaled to about 40 million turnover. It was the leading business when it comes to trades as a trade marketplace. But still, we saw a lot of potential, a lot of room for growth, especially around developing the category, right? Because there were so many different categories that were evolving, so many marketplaces that had become that go-to destination. Let's say when you're trying to buy a house, most of the time you'll go to a marketplace like Rightmove. If you're thinking about buying a car, most of the time you'll go to AutoTrader. Your insurance, travel, you name it, right? So most of the time you'll go to a marketplace. However, when you're looking for a plumber, most of the time you're going to ask your neighbor. So we thought, well, clearly there is something that can be done for a marketplace like Checkatrade to develop and grow that category in the same way that others did. So for us, it was to become that go-to place where homeowners go to get their jobs done by quality tradespeople. Quality was core to Checkatrade. We were very famous for having quality tradespeople. We vet them, we check them, we review them. Now, when I joined Checkatrade, I found these were the goals they had. These were the 5 to drive, they would call them at Checkatrade. So there were always 5 goals they had over a particular quarter, usually would carry on for a bit longer. But that was a framework that actually I felt that was useful and I could adopt and I could work on in terms of cascading from those business outcomes to product outcomes throughout the organization. But the thing that was a little bit odd for me is what those business goals were, right? So one of the ones that may have caught your attention was web visits, because for a while I always thought like, well, what's the value of traffic? What's the value of a web visit, right? Because I guess through my experience background in marketing, I knew I could generate a lot of traffic, but not necessarily traffic that would convert to a specific business outcome. So I started challenging the business on this. And I started exploring different ways by which they could understand the impact that certain metrics would have. So this was more of a joke. This never happened, by the way. But having an ad of an attractive tradesperson would obviously drive a lot of traffic, but wouldn't necessarily convert into a lot of jobs, right? So I thought, look, this is the kind of thing you guys need to get out of. But what was actually happening, and this is no joke, is that the paid team, so the performance marketing team, was focused on cheap keywords. It was focused on those keywords that would drive a lot of traffic. For example, gardeners in Scotland was a very cheap keyword for you to bid on. It would drive a lot of traffic. Only problem is that we didn't have any gardeners in Scotland. So it would drive a lot of traffic that would never convert. So it's really important to get the right metrics, right? Now, again, as I was joining, I knew that I owned the P&L, even though, it may not be that obvious to you. I always acted as I was responsible for the organization, for the business, and for the P&L as a whole. So I started thinking about, well, what's more important for me here right now? I'm the product leader, but what does this business need more than anything? And critically, it was about data. It was about measuring what matters the most. The reason why we were looking at sessions is because there wasn't a great understanding about the data, about the user journey as a whole. So we spend a lot of time to start with defining what's that user journey? How does it work? All the way from search, describing your job, finding an available trade, then that messy middle point where you're getting in touch, you're making a call, maybe a message, getting a quote, then completing the job, paying for the job, reviewing the job, right? So that was the journey that we had to get very close to. Because once you've got clarity on that journey, you can move into something which is far more impactful from a business point of view and from a product experience perspective. So this is how I defined the data strategy, because even though I was a product leader and not necessarily responsible for data, I worked very close with the data team to define the strategy of where we needed to head next. Because when you look at a metric of sessions, why would we be doing that? Why would a business like Checkatrade focus on sessions as a key metric? Well, it was obvious at the time, but and the key was that they just didn't have the data maturity. They didn't understand what that traffic was doing. So I had to get very close with the data team to understand what that traffic did, and critically it was generating contacts, right? So it was generating, let's say, a call or a message for a tradesperson. Now, once you see that contact come through, you start thinking, well, what's the value of that contact? And you start having conversations with tradespeople just to get a perspective of the value of a call versus a value of a message. Now, through those conversations, we started realizing that not all leads, not all contacts are valued equally. And so we moved into a metric which we defined as leads. What is a lead? The lead is basically, you may be, as a consumer, calling, let's say, Bob the Builder once, so you may be calling Bob the Builder 3 times in a particular week or a month. That still is just one lead. It can be multiple contacts, but you need to understand if it's that same connection or not. Now, once you understand those leads, you get closer to the homeowner, to the user, right? The user will have a job opportunity. So, for example, they may be contacting two different electricians for the same job. They're just trying to compare quotes or trying to see who is available. And understanding that was crucial because ultimately the job opportunities is what became that type of North Star that we were going after, right? And the more you get closer to the job opportunity, the more you get to know the homeowner. So now, once we got all this, that completely redefined Checkatrade, right? Because we moved from a model which was a subscription model. Tradespeople would be joining, and they would be paying a monthly subscription. And basically, if they got a lot of reviews, they would move up the search rankings. But it was a very simple model. Through this data strategy, we were able to move more towards like a pay per lead type subscription model. So if you wanted, let's say, 8 leads as a plumber, you would be paying £120. But if you wanted double the leads, just you'd pay double. If you wanted less leads, you'd pay less. So we managed to develop experiences that through search engines and through job quotes mechanisms, we would be delivering the amount of leads that tradespeople wanted. Now, and this is another tip, that as you start developing these type of experiences, you're probably going to get close to what Dan Hockenmeyer coined as an economic engine. What does that mean? Well, for him, the way he described is that until you can express your business as an equation, you don't really understand it. And what does that actually mean? So the way that he's been working with lots of organizations, and we went very deep with it at Checkatrade and at Gumtree, is an economic engine that helps you understand like what happens when you invest, let's say, on a performance marketing channel. What does that happen to the traffic that comes through? How long do they stay with you? What's the lifetime value of that user? And then ultimately you can go down to the profitability that results as you spend that £1 up front. And that's relatively straightforward for a business like GiffGaff, which is B2C, because you put £1 in and you can very quickly do the maths in terms of the pounds out. But that's a lot more complicated when you're operating in a marketplace, right? Because when you, let's say, try to connect a tradesperson to a homeowner, you're investing on one side of the equation. So let's say paid marketing for a consumer, then ultimately that consumer will not pay back to you. It will pay through the value that the tradesperson gets from that consumer. So building that economic engine for a marketplace tends to be a lot more complicated. But Dan Hockenmeyer is very much of a marketplace guru. So if you are into that space, I really recommend his podcast with Lenny. Anyway, that covers the presentation I had, and this is a good time to hand it over to you yourself, Ed, and anyone else who may have some questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Kim. I love that slide you threw up about the 5 to drive at Checkatrade. When you talked a little bit about kind of refining those metrics. Did you also reduce the number of targets that you had? And I asked that because I've seen those kind of like broad brush dashboards before, and what I found is it's sort of it makes it very difficult for people to kind of really understand what the strategy of a company is, because they're kind of like, well, we just need to make everything better, so we'll just do everything.
Yeah, well, I think as a business, you've got to have clarity on your vision. You've got to have clarity on your North Star, and that can take a while until you've got a good understanding of that North Star. And then inevitably, that's going to cascade down to specific business outcomes. But critically, there you need to choose. One of the great things about those OKR models is that they force you to focus. They force you to focus on metrics that multiple teams can get behind over short time frames. For us, that time frame was a quarter, and every quarter we would review those OKRs and choose amongst many the ones that we feel we could make a good impact. So yeah, I think focus is quite important. But I think just to answer your question, there's something about, well, one thing is the metric, and the other thing is the strategy right behind that metric. And I would say we were a bit flexible with this. So at times there would be those bit more prescriptive type of initiatives that would take multiple quarters to deliver and to see value. Uh, but often we were operating in a far more lean methodology, more conversion led. So you would get teams to experiment their ways to deliver that specific outcome. So we wouldn't really know. We would just say, we feel we can move this metric. We've got one or two teams behind that metric, and that's our bet. We may have an idea of an initiative that could deliver towards that metric, but we would leave it to teams to figure it out.
Yeah, super. Tom's got a question in the chat. He's asking for new business, and it probably depends on what it is. What's your take on setting metrics? You know, as in like you just had NPS when you were starting at GiffGaff. Um, is NPS always a good metric, or does it depend on the business?
Well, two things I would say. Look, I first of all, some people challenge the OKR methodology, and I think it's right. This is not a perfect methodology, but it's the best. It's the best I found, right? And it's the one that's worked across multiple industries, multiple sizes. So having a goal, having metrics, and communicating them and the progress towards that metric tends to be the best framework available. Now, in terms of where to start, I guess that's a tricky one. So when I joined Checkatrade, the metrics that were there that had been chosen were not very mature, right? So sessions was the one that I personally had to deliver on, but very quickly I organize a team, particularly the data team, to help me move away to a more impactful, more meaningful metric, and a metric that very quickly finance get behind as well. And the more you, I guess, get close to data in finance, the more you grow with them, the more you deliver more sophisticated metrics. So it's a journey, right? You may start with something very simple. And for you, it could be net promoter score. Maybe it's your app review score. But then over time, you're going to realize that what moves the dial is something else. And you will start moving towards metrics that have a greater impact, not only in terms of the user journey, but also on the finances of the business.
Super. Ben's asking another question. How do you think about obtaining NPS? How do you think obtaining NPS will work as conversational AI comes in more?
Um, it's probably just going to be easier. I mean, look at GiffGaff, we really obsessed about NPS. How we collected it was through email communications, and we had different cohorts. But we looked at it on a daily basis. So we had a daily NPS figure, and we would see, and it's probably taking it too far, but if there were any movements there. But critically for us, we would do everything to ensure that net promoter score was stable or growing, almost to a fault. I mean, so some of the programs which are still there today at GiffGaff was one that is called best plan advice, right? This is one that even finance directors had challenges with, but we proved that it could become very valuable. The best plan advice would tell you at the end of your plan which plan you should be on. Most of the times, it would recommend you to move to a cheaper plan. So if you are on 20 pounds, it would say, well, you're not using as much data. You probably should move to a 15-pound plan. And the reality is that most users didn't really move. They didn't change, but they loved us for being so transparent, right? So experience and net promoter score is often a perception. A good example of that is that, look, we always had a much higher experience score than O2 across so many metrics, even though we were on the same network. For questions like, how would you vote us for coverage versus O2? We scored way higher. Well, it was the same. It was the same network and the same coverage. But the more you get your users to trust you, the more they will value you across any metric.
I love that. You talked a little about NPS, so maybe I can dig a little bit deeper on that. You said you were capturing it via email. Did you have any kind of like further analyses to dig into what the drivers were? And can you talk a little bit about what they were?
Yeah, I guess those surveys evolved also over time. Still, the basic metric was the same. How likely are you to recommend GiffGaff to friends or family? And a score of 0 to 10, right? So that was the beginning. But then the more we realized what was driving those scores, the more we would have those follow-up questions as to how would you vote us for coverage, as I mentioned, or how would you vote us for data speeds, or how would you vote the joining journey or the app, right? So there were few things that we would dive into just to help move the metric further up. But yeah, often it was about being very transparent. We took a lot of inspiration from businesses like Netflix or Spotify, far more than any other telecommunication, I would say, right? Because telcos tended to offer very complex, let's say, billing systems. So everyone was charged different, right? So you could be on a, let's say, 10 gig a month, but you're paying £20. I may be paying £23. Why is that? Oh, because you've been around for 2 years longer, or maybe it's because I joined from a usage channel, let's say, right? Depending on your journey or how long you'd been around, you'd be in a different billing plan, which creates an absolute nightmare. But that's, if you think about it, why would they do that? Spotify would never do that, or Netflix. Like they're far more simple and transparent in their billing mechanisms. And we thought this is not how you're going to build a solid database and a solid, user base that will trust you. For us, it felt necessary that we simplify our tariffs and we unify them, so everyone's on the same plan. Doesn't matter how long they've been with us, and it doesn't matter what channel they came from. It was always the same, and as a result, we massively simplified the experience. But we had a great experience score too.
Super. Yeah, I love it. Any other questions then from people? Well, Kim, let me just say thank you very much for that then. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. Great to see some examples then of what you've done across different businesses. And we'll have to get you back in to talk a little bit about what you're doing with Early Phoenix. I'm sure building AI startups is a hot topic for everyone as well.
I'd love to. Thank you, Ed.
Super, Kim. I hope to see you all soon. Right,
See ya.
thanks. Bye.